They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking.
Hi, this is Nikolai, and you're listening to my dad, Rafal, co-host James Jardine, and featuring Mr. Jim Tiller on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Plug in, listen up, and enjoy.
Deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to your favorite cybersecurity podcast, the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast, episode 641, the stream tells me. I have a great guest for you. Unfortunately, James and Jim have life priorities, and this was, we scheduled and rescheduled this on short notice, so here I am, there, no, that way, there he is. Kevin, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, yeah, and I'm Kevin Fielder. Currently, I'm Chief Security Officer for NatWest Box and Metal. For those not familiar, we simultaneously managed to be a 700-person startup and part of NatWest, which is a large UK bank. And we've got 2 brands and 2 CEOs. So we make life interesting, but it's a really exciting place to work. I get to do kind of financial services, but also we're kind of off to the side. So we're fully cloud native. We've built a bank in the AWS. We've got a data lake in GCP. My SecOps stuff's in GCP with Google Workspace. So my legacy is like old containers and old Java as opposed to mainframes and things. So yeah, I get to be really lucky that I'm in financial services. Security is so security serious, but I also get to play with some really cool kind of modern toys and ways of working as well.
That's awesome. We're gonna definitely get to some of that conversation in a second. But we were talking before the show, and it is amazing how long it has been since the last time we had a proper conversation. It turns out that we worked together, as many people that I know tend to go back roots to. We both worked in the GE Consumer Finance Division for a bit.
Yeah, it's 2005, 2008 kind of time. So yeah, a long while ago.
Yeah, right around there. You were, we were both early in our security engineering. We were both novices back then in that large company. And I tell you what, man, of all the things that taught me a lot about the cyberspace, I came into that job thinking I knew a thing or two because I'd done security for a while. I'd done some pen testing. I'd done some engineering. I'd done some managed services, startup stuff. And it was very strange at the time.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's a great experience for me. And I think I joined there as a not security person. I was doing kind of projects and things, but I'd always, things like the late 90s, I'd always quite liked security. So I did, building firewalls and other bits and bobs when I was in non-security roles that had a kind of security slant to them. And then when I was at GE, I was in home lending, which was part of GE Capital, as I think you mentioned, and we had a virus outbreak, and I managed to fix it with some registry hacks and deleting files and mucking about before Symantec got a fix out to us. And it just coincided. This is where luck comes into career so often. Right? It just coincided with Ian, a new security manager, had joined, and he was hiring a team, and he found out what I did, and he's like, "Do you want a job?" And I was like, "Yes, please." And then we had to have a pretend interview in front of HR to tick a box, even though he'd already offered me the job, just to go through the process. But yeah, it was really, really good time, and like my first official actual security role was there. So yeah.
I noticed this is how you can tell is a long time ago because you said the word virus outbreak instead of malware. That's because we had viruses. Sure. Hey, were you around when the SQL Slammer worm took out the entire network internally? Were you around for that glory?
I remember. It was certainly talked about. I might have been there prior to me being security. But yeah, it's amazing that you'd struggle now to imagine trying to fish around and get rid of a bit of malware with literally a few registry hacks and deleting a few files. Like, you wouldn't have much luck. But yeah, it's just simpler times, I guess.
And so that was 2003. So that may have been before.
It was,
but that was my first experience into what an actual catastrophic security event looks like. When everything is shut down, nobody has any idea what's going on. An entire global company brought to its technological knees in a matter of moments, and it was horrendous. it was crazy pants, man.
I guess
It was nuts.
Another difference is no one was asking for a ransom, which would have been how it went down now, right?
That's right, because we would have had to drag bags of money somewhere if that was the case back then, right? There's no Bitcoin.
That's true.
So you took you stayed on the enterprise side. I stayed very briefly on there with you. I think it was like 5.5, almost 6 years. Then I jumped to the vendor side, and to say I never looked back is an understatement. What kept you on the enterprise security side?
So I genuinely love blue team stuff. Yeah, for the defending. I think it's one of the things I love about security is you're never done, right? You've always got to learn more things. Early on in my career, obviously, I was very much more technical. Now it's much more kind of influencing and getting budgets and strategy and things. But it's the fact that you're never done. I always kind of think if you're, and I'll probably get slated by finance people, but if you're in, say, finance, for example, once you understand the broad rules and how to do the budgets and whatever else, it's probably interesting and exciting, and budgets change over time, but it's going to be very similar year on year and month on month. Whereas you never know what to expect, when the next 0 day is going to come out, or when someone does something they shouldn't internally or whatever else. There's always something new to learn or something new to find. It's kind of, you've got to try and be one step ahead of the adversaries and one step better than them. And the other thing I like about it, I really enjoy about it, especially as I've matured in my career, is the fact that it's so much about the people. So technology is all cool and everything else, but actually the way to get security done in an organization is to work across the organization and try and get everyone to understand what they need to understand about security, and get engagement from board and exec down to every engineer and everything else, and get people all rowing in the right direction. So it's that influencing and working across that and helping people understand, but also that, as we touched on from our conversation before, was the fact that we also have to help our teams understand that we're part of a bigger universe, because it's really easy, and I did when I was a sort of a young engineer. It's like, why aren't we fixing everything? This is really important. It's security stuff. It's and it's like, well, yeah, but we're not the be all and end all. Businesses take huge risks all the time in other areas. We're part of a huge risk universe that a business operates in. We need to understand that we're just part of that, and how do we manage that risk within tolerance, as opposed to try and fix everything.
You said the magic words there that triggered some mental PTSD for me. I told you, you guys that have listened to this podcast for a while, I've told this story a million times, but it's worth saying again. And I walked into that job in one of the, arguably one of the greatest companies on the planet at the time, probably still in the top of the conversation there. Great legacy Jack Welch built in that organization. And it was like, I once had it explained to me, there's like a mutual fund, because they were in everything. GE was in every single bit, right? Like when they owned the equipment, they leased back to themselves. They owned the land, so they could pull the sand, so that they could, the silicas, they could make the glass, make the filaments, and made the light bulbs, and then trucked it out to the stores. The only thing they didn't own was the store, which was, anyway. But I learned walking in there, so I thought I knew it. I thought security to me was absolute, right? It was like, well, why don't we fix this? There's a vulnerability here. It has to get fixed. And pardon my French, folks, but I got my ass kicked so hard so many times that eventually I was like, okay, I'm doing something wrong, because not only are they not listening to me, they're telling me I'm a complete moron because I don't get it. Like, they don't get it. Wait a minute, maybe there's something wrong here. And that's kind of how I got on that kind of similar path as you in mental thinking, and that is, we're doing this wrong.
Yeah, it's understanding that context. I try the example. You might be making some sort of multi-billion-pound or whatever your currency is bet on moving into an entirely new region or launching a whole new product. And if that fails, that's hundreds of millions or billions if you're a large company on the line. Or even a smaller company, it could be the difference between getting something out the door before your competitor and surviving, or getting out second and not surviving, right? So this whole huge sums of money and potentially your company's future.
That is key.
And then you've got some security guy in the corner going, cross-site scripting, SQL injection, and it's like, yes, they're really important, and don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking them. My first half of my career was all about those things, and we still have vulnerability management that I own in my world now, right? But it's understanding how those risks fit into that bigger picture, and why you might have a risk tolerance for taking some risks to get to market first to succeed, versus taking no risk, not getting to market first, and not succeeding. So you've got a perfectly secure environment, but no customers, or you don't exist anymore, right? So it's that kind of bigger picture understanding that I think is really important for security folk to get to sort of appreciate, for want of a better term.
Yeah, and I think I want to wrap. We'll jump back into the risk conversation. It's definitely worth having towards the end of this conversation. You mentioned your environment, which caught my brain's attention a little bit. Talk to me about how you look at the technological environment you play in or that you own, that you're responsible for. How's that from a security perspective in terms of diversity of tech, diversity of thought?
Yeah, so that's two big topics there, tech and thought, right? So so those I'm familiar, I did touch on it. So we are, I'm very lucky that I get to play in financial services, but we're a cloud native, genuinely DevOps, containerized infrastructure as code kind of company. So the things I have to really think about from a security tech point of view, especially in terms of how we build things and engage with people, is how do we do it at that speed, and how do we do it in a way that enables and empowers people. So it's not, here's all the toll gates and here's things going to stop you. It's how do we do scanning in the pipeline? How do we do automated and continuous security testing of things? How do we make things as streamlined as quick as possible? And where we can, how do we self-serve that to engineers so they can ask us for help if they need it, but they haven't got to constantly come to us and my relatively small AppSec team being the bottleneck in that scenario. So it's very much how do you work at how your business works. And obviously that's different from business to business. For any security team, is how do we work in the way the business needs us to work to enable them. And in terms of, and then obviously the other thing with cloud stuff, leverage as much as you can of what they do, right? So we try and like leverage where it makes sense. You don't want to be too locked into one cloud, obviously, but try and leverage the capabilities they offer you, because they'll have a whole load of things that you can automate and do, whether it's security centers and guard duties and whatever else to make use of those, so you don't have to keep trying more and more tools. Sorry, you also got.
All right, so you said it, so I'm gonna follow up.
Yeah,
you've got multiple clouds. Everybody uses multiple clouds. I used to be able to say, hey, what cloud are you? And people would be like, oh, we're dabbling in AWS, we're dabbling in GCP, or now they're like all of them, every single one of them, and then some that I've never heard of. How do you take advantage of security capabilities in them? Because they're not at parity. They're not designed the same. They're not even, I would argue that they're functionally not the same, conceptually maybe similar, right? How do you create a security policy? Let's start at the policy level. How do you create a security policy that you can enforce across multiple clouds and whatever on-prem, office space, work from home environments you have that doesn't cost an insane fortune and require 1,000 people to do it?
So we're kind of, because although we are cloud native, we're fairly tight. Obviously we use a lot of SaaS stuff, but in terms of where we host things, we run ourselves. It's only AWS and GCP. We have production in AWS and data lake and stuff like that in GCP. So I have different capabilities, but we do apply, I guess, at the policy level and the kind of principles level, the same controls. And we do some unified tooling. So for example, we have, I might as well say we use Sysdig, for example, on our containers, and that's across everything. So we have some things that we unify that are not cloud native, not specific to a cloud vendor. And we'll use some tools like that to give us that clear picture everywhere. And same with like attack surface management or attack surface scanning kind of tools as well. We use one of them across everything, for example. But then within the cloud environment, we'll also, because we use principles and policies, we can, there where it makes sense, use the different tooling to ensure we align to our principles and policies, just with having to have some expertise in the two different cloud environments. And we're lucky enough to have really good kind of platform and SRE type teams as well that are really tightly knitted with my team. So they help us with kind of ensuring we apply those rules and the guardrails. And that's the other one. I think you've used the term in some of your podcast before, but I'm a really big fan of the guardrails terminology. Yeah. So enforce a set of rules about what people can do, and that can be how recent your containers need to be, or what things can be made public, or whatever else, right? And you enforce those rules, and then as long as people play within that rules, they're empowered to kind of just color as much as they want, because they're playing within rules that are within your risk appetite. And then if they want to draw outside the lines, that's when they have to come and have a chat and go, right, this is why, and get approval and justification for that. So yeah, a combination of kind of principles and guardrails, and using some tooling that isn't CSP native, where to give us that ability to have that standard set, but then using CSP tools where it makes sense to, both for economies and just because they've got great tooling.
I think that's an interesting way to put it. I've kind of been skeptical because early on when we were talking about cloud capabilities, 8, 9, 10 years ago, everybody was talking about being able to have hybrid environments, right? Develop once, deploy anywhere. And I always felt like that was a bit of a scam. Like that simply wasn't going to work because none of these companies, none of these environments had any incentive to work together or to develop. I mean, they were sure there were standards, but all the standards were different than everybody else's standards. And going at it from a setting the guardrails and policy level, I think that's the way. Look, when we were both back at G, that's the only way they could do that, right? Corporate would set the guardrails and say you can go between here and here, and you have to be able to do this. They never said how. They just said you have to have every endpoint covered with some sort of tool that does antivirus. If you want to manage them all by hand, as long as you fit within the deploy signatures within an hour or two or whatever that was at the time to all of them, you could literally do it by just disk or file update. But nobody did because that was insane. So we'd find ways to do that. And I like the way that that you presented it, because it is a bit counterintuitive to the way security in large enterprise and maybe even small has grown up over the years, because we've gotten so very directly prescriptive on if you're the head of a business unit, right? And you say, okay, well, you have to do this. You have to use this piece of technology. You have to use this endpoint tool. You have to go do this and implement this and do this. And that prescription doesn't fit every use case. And that's where I think a lot of the friction came in. Do you agree?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's you can't be too prescriptive, especially when you've got a disparate environment, right? Because it doesn't work. And that's where I think with regulations as well, they come down. If policies or regulations are too prescriptive, they don't work. Yeah. So I'm a huge fan of making things kind of outcome focused. So what is the outcome? And then you can demonstrate how you get to that outcome. And it kind of doesn't matter how you get there. Obviously, there's a balance to be had. And I think that's where every organization will struggle a little bit, whether it's how cloud portable are you versus making the most of the tools. Because if you're purely cloud agnostic, for example, you make very little use of cloud specific tools from the CSP, so you get very little benefits from the CSP. That's cloud service provider, sorry, for those not familiar, like AWS or GCP. But if you're too tightly coupled with them, it's really hard to move. So in the same kind of way, you want to have enough prescriptive things that you haven't got the Wild West. Like, for example, if you use Kubernetes containers and Java, you probably don't want someone spinning up a Windows box and writing .NET code, because who's going to support it when your entire support net, all of your kind of 24/7 support stuff is set up for Kubernetes and Java, right? So you want some rules about tech stack and things to keep it manageable, especially as you scale, because I thought you don't want 50 different things running that, some Windows, some Linux, some containers, some not containers, some serverless, some full fat servers. It's how are you going to manage all of that? So you do need a little bit of prescription, I think, as you scale to keep the environment manageable, but where within that, guardrails are definitely the way forward. I kind of like to, I'll get off my little hobby horse in 1 second. I kind of like to think of it as if you say you're an engineer and you've got to develop an awesome product, right? The more things we can take away from you having to worry about, the more you can focus on developing awesome products. So like with platform and SRE teams, whatever else, you've got your golden images and things like that and the golden path. So you almost don't have to tell people not to do things, because you make the golden path so easy to walk. So your containers are there, your Java versions there, it's all patched to manage. All you have to do is take the latest container and put your stuff on it and it runs.
Right.
So by taking that all away from them, you're not actually taking away their empowerment. You're taking away all of the kind of mundane platformy things from them, so that they can focus all of their mental energy on making the best product, because they haven't got to worry about what type of container shall I use, what version of Kubernetes shall I use, what Java shall I use. That's all just there. So you can focus all of your thinking on building an awesome product feature.
Yeah. See, I think that's a great approach. I think it works almost everywhere. There's some places that I've talked to that are like, well, we're developer led and we let our developers be creative. And I always figure that's a cop out. It's a bit of a cop out, right? Like that's, you can still be creative, but there's very few use cases where like the guardrails you've set, version 1.1 through 1.4 of some platform, and that iterates as as security is required. There's very few times where I've run into where they're like, well, yeah, we can't use that because of this thing that no longer is supported. I was like, well, then that's a different problem, right? That's a legacy not moving with the technology problem. Have you found a lot of in that approach that you're taking, have you found a lot of having to grant a lot of exceptions, or is it just people just kind of fall in line?
I think it's a kind of a gradual process, right? So you don't go from having nothing to here's all the rules. You start off quite wide and gradually narrow down over time as you scale or as you find problems. So you touch wood shouldn't have too many. We try not to have too many exceptions, because exceptions then just mean you've got a bunch of different things running in different ways, right? So it should be, I think, as much as possible within the rules. And if you find you're getting some exceptions to those, then it's, are your rules right for your organization? And do you need to adjust what people are allowed to do because you keep having to have this exception or that exception to allow things to run? So it's like, well, we probably haven't got quite the right set of principles or guardrails, whatever else you call them, because we keep having exceptions. So do we need to adjust those so that it works? Or do we need to educate people on doing things in different ways so they don't think they need exceptions because they think they need an exception because they don't understand that they could do something in a different way? So I guess depending on the exception, it'll either be some education and working with people to solve problems in different ways, or as an organization, let's have a think about, have we got the appropriate guardrails and policies in place?
Have you, going back a step in this conversation, have you found that the vendors you're using in the industry, and this is purely well, I'll say self-centered question because I'm working for a vendor, right? Have you found that the vendors that you have out there and available to you work? How do I want to ask this? Because I don't want to ask this the way I'm thinking of it, but like, so you've got your choice of security vendors, and you've got multiple clouds, multiple different places to implement things. Are you finding your vendors supportive of that strategy? How about that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have to choose them judiciously, because we have a different environment in some places in terms of what we use. So someone who's set up for a kind of on-prem Windows server type environment wouldn't work for us, but the ones that understand our ways of working, the kind of modern companies and modern tech stacks, are certainly pretty receptive to how we want to work. And it's obviously a part of the onboarding, right? Sorry if you can hear some bangs. I've got a 2-year-old running around upstairs.
Beautiful.
just he's creating havoc by the sounds of it. So yeah, I think it's when obviously as part of the RFP kind of process, we go through this. So if we're looking at a new thing, it's like we want to be able to manage it by code. We want it to be able to integrate with that pipeline, whatever we're looking at. And part of that process is, this is how we work and this is how it needs to integrate. So if we do that job properly, we find vendors that work well with our tech stack and how we want to work, because the bit of work about talking to them and POCing and everything else gets us to a point when it works well. And it's like there's I think it's an interesting thing, right? Because it's easy to like vendor bash and stuff, but I was chatting to a good friend of mine who's also on the vendor side at lunchtime today, and yeah, he was saying if he meets another CISO who says they hate vendors, he's going to punch them, which also he didn't mean really. But it's like I think people conflate the I don't like some tactics with I don't like vendors, because we need vendors and vendors need us, right? Because without solutions, we're not going to build it all ourselves, right? So some of them are just too big to even think about building ourselves. So I think you do very much have to work with your vendors and suppliers, and understand that without people providing solutions to your problems, you'd have to build it all yourself, and you haven't got enough people to do that. So I think it is very much I try to treat them as partnerships. And I have some people that I've known for years, and whatever vendor they go to, even if I don't need it or I'm not sure about it, I'll have a chat with them, because I know they'll never harass me. They won't keep chasing me for stuff. They're just good people. So it comes back to people again, right? On the vendor side as well, having really good people who are not a pain in my ass, for want of a better term. I heard you talk about being PG-13, so I'm trying to moderate my language, because I'm quite sweary on one of your other podcasts. But yeah, so but I don't want to kind of ruin your ratings and make you some sort of 18 rating.
No, so listen, one of the things that there was a conversation on LinkedIn a little bit ago that you were a part of that was talking about like vendors approaching, how vendors approach CISOs. Give me if you're, how do you deal with it? How do you manage it? Because everybody out there is trying to sell something, right? And there are no shortages of CISOs that lists, right? They go to conferences that they're aggregated and whatnot. What's the best way for people to approach you that doesn't drive you crazy, and B, doesn't limit it to just the people you already know? Like, how does somebody you've never talked to before get your attention in a reasonable way? Because I think that's a question a lot of people want to ask.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if it's at a conference or event, especially if I've come up to you, I'm obviously already semi-interested. Referrals are great. So if you know people who know someone and they think you're great, so if someone says like, hey, you should have a chat to this person, their product's great and they're a great person, that's what can happen. So having people that in the industry that, obviously not people who are on your advisory board or you're paying, because that kind of gets away from it. But just if you've got people you've worked with who are willing to intro you to people because they're like, hey, this is a great guy, that's a great way to do it. If it's totally cold, I'm probably not going to answer the phone. I'll be brutally honest. I just don't answer it to numbers I don't know, just because there's so many phone calls, right? It's not just sales. It's not just sales. It's people selling everything. It's not just security stuff, right? But if you can send me a message or whatever, keep it succinct and very much tell me what problem you solve. And then if I happen to need that, I will come back to you. If I don't, I won't, right? And it's not being rude. I just get a deluge of the emails, and I get it's hard, right? Because there needs to be that perfect storm of you're solving a problem at the time I'm looking to solve the problem, and I've got some budget and people to solve the problem, and then I might be looking to do something about it. And you can do it every now and then, but have a good CRM, because the other thing that's terrible is if you get, especially when there's like 3 or 4 people from the same company contact you in the same
week, that's tough.
That's terrible.
That's
so
tough.
I'm never going to mind if, say, once every 2 to 4 months I get a message from you that says, just touching base, not going to harass you any further. Remember, these are the things we solve. If any of these are on your current roadmap or things you're looking at in the next 12 to 18 months, it'd be great to have a chat. Done. And just leave it at that. And if you keep that every now and then, that'll do it. And the other thing I is understanding people's cycles. If you're, unless you come in with something that's so amazing, I'm going to throw out other things I'm doing this year, or I realize I can't live without it and I go cap in hand to ask for more budget, my budget for this year's done. Right, so for 25, I already know what my team's doing. Otherwise, I'd have no plan, and we'd just be running around doing whatever we fancied each month. So we've got a plan for the year. We know what we're doing. We know what tools we're implementing because of I understand what gaps we've got or whatever else or things I need to improve. So I'm not going to be buying a whole load of new things this year if it's not on my plan. That's just how cycles work, right? Obviously, again, things can change. So if it's like you're like doing something, it's like, oh my god, that's amazing. Or it doesn't mean I won't be looking at new things this year in terms of getting them, but I know which things I'm looking at. So if you're not on that list, unless you convince me that I absolutely have to have this thing, I'm probably not going to be looking at it. But if you are on the list of things I'm looking at this year, then you may well get thrown into the mix. But yeah, I think again, it's hard, right? Because it's a bit like dating. It's got to be that right moment. You see someone across a bar and they happen to be single and happen to want to meet someone and happen to like you, right? It's the same. It's all of those things have to align. You see someone across a bar and they think you're cute and you think they're cute, but they're with someone and they're happy. It's just, hey, you're attractive, but I'm not interested. That might be cool. I'm like, yeah, that sounds cool, but at this point in time, I'm not. I don't need it, or I'm not buying.
Yeah. So this is the challenge I think a lot of companies run into is they'll bring somebody in as a new sales rep, and I'm not going to belabor this point, but I think this is something because I see this every day in my friends and my peers, and they'll bring somebody into a sales role. That person will say, well, I've got a quota to hit. I got to like pound the pavement, call everybody I can think of. Somebody will answer, somebody will buy. And there's this, I feel like especially in our industry, because it is so heavily oversold, that there's like this ramp you've got, I'd say anywhere between 3 to 6 months, if you're diligent, where if you have to show up, right, on LinkedIn at first, right, just hold conversations, find out what people are interested in, and get in on it, have an opinion, have something to say, become relevant. That's not easy. Then go to events in the areas that you're in, because then you get to actually get to know somebody and talk to them. And that way, I think that's been my preferred way, simply because aside from inviting him on a podcast, I'm just kidding. But that's a good way to really build sort of a long, because then you like you said, if you know somebody, you've gotten to know them, they're going to switch jobs and you're going to take that call every time. And I think so that's a great way, but third and last, but also very important, is don't be a jerk, right? Don't call 25 times in a week and be like, hey, you haven't returned my call. Let me try your cell phone. Oh yeah. Well, let me try your significant other. And I'm going to try your house after that. Like I've heard of people doing that, and it is a very quick way to make sure you never make another dollar in this industry.
You've got a couple of things I actually think about as doing that. One, I think companies have something to ask for as well, because not just salespeople. If you give someone ridiculous targets and I don't know how you reward it because it's harder, but the soft side of things. So if you're building those relationships, so I do think next time I'm looking at product solution, I need to solve thing X. Your company's on my list because I've had a really good interaction with your people. It might be 12 months later, 18 months later, but that if I've had a terrible experience with you, I'm never going to use you. It's not like you're never going to be the maybe if you're like an AWS or GCP size company, I might do. But fundamentally, for pretty much all vendors, there's quite a few options out there. So if you give me a poor experience, and guess what I do? I'm in a bunch of CISO groups. I go, I had this awful experience with this company, and a bunch of other people probably won't pick up the phone to you. So really focus on giving people good experience. And the other one you touched on was talking about going to events and stuff. Sharing information for free, in inverted commas, has a halo. So it's a great example. I won't name the company, but I spoke to someone who works in kind of identity protection, identity security stuff, and they're coming into my team day in a couple of weeks to do an hour chat on they've got kind of a security researcher that is really well renowned and goes to talk to Microsoft and stuff, and they're going to come in and just do a talk about kind of the things they're seeing and how attacks against identity in SaaS environments like ours work and stuff, and that's it. And there's but if we like them talking to them, that's created such a good impression, because it's like, there's no guaranteed sale. I've already told you I might not be that interested. We're quite buttoned down on this in our environment. And then they do want to do a little chat afterwards about how they might work in our environment, but very specific to our environment. But again, they've taken the time to go, we'll come and do this free thing for you with no expectations. And if we do chat about sales, we've listened to what your environment looks like, and we will tell you how we might augment that, not give you a load of stuff about an environment with Active Directory and other stuff that you haven't got because it's irrelevant. So taking that little bit of time and offering me something that isn't a sales pitch that my team will enjoy. And they're a bunch of engineers, right? So talk about how people do man in the middle attacks against like SaaS identity tokens and those kind of things is interesting to engineers. So that kind of research, in-depth technical chat to a security team with no sales push will just leave us feeling a good impression of that company, that if I then do start looking at that, oh yeah, they were cool, we'll definitely chat to them on the list of companies, right? So have a little think about kind of lost leaders and getting out there and sharing your research and other things to create that effect of, they know what they're talking about. I saw a great talk. You go to a conference and we've all seen the let me talk to you about a security problem, which is a thinly veiled let me talk to you about how we solve the security problem with our solution.
I've certainly,
that's rubbish.
I've
a good research based chat about, hey, this is what we're seeing in the world, these are attacks we're seeing, these are actually what's been going on, or whatever it is you're doing, or some psychology if you're a security awareness company, but not selling your product, just talking about the psychology of engagement.
That's what I'm saying, is like, be relevant, right? You want to be relevant. And I think that's why it's so important to pick a company that you can not only believe in, but actually does something that's relevant. Hey, before we run out of time, that's a good segue. But before we run out of time, I intended to have a quick chat about the way that you bridge the risk conversation with your engineering, your operations teams, right? So you've got people above you that expect X, Y, and Z at a business level. Then you've got people below you that you need them to do P, Q, and R down here. You're the bridge. How do you what's your take on conveying the messaging in a way both up and down, so that it's not just, here's how many ports were scanned this month to executives, and I need you to decrease cost to engineers, because those things are they miss each other, right?
Yeah. So I think when it's kind of to non-security people, whether that's executives, board, or just other people in the company, we've all used the term before, but it's how do you turn that into kind of the so what to the business, right? So what is the business risk? So a good one that we've had some really good results from recently is talking about how we kind of add our context to vulnerabilities, for example. So that, and the reason why even to our exec that was interesting is because I spoke about it in language of this is how we manage risk within Appetite whilst minimizing impact on delivery velocity. So rather than go, here's a shit ton of vulnerabilities, let's add some context to those, so that this one that's a critical in inverted commas in the scanning tool, but it's on a container that's 3 levels deep from the internet and can only be accessed by people who have privessed with approval and MFA'd. probably the likelihood of that being exploited is low. So that critical might actually be a medium in our environment.
Yeah.
So we downgrade things that are very low likelihood of doing. But equally, if it's a critical on an internet system, or even a medium on an internet facing payment page that is being actively exploited in the wild, might move up to a high because it's super likely to be attacked and exploited, right? So, but by doing that context and by adding the context, we can manage risk, as I said before, within appetite and minimize impact on velocity. So we're working with the engineering product teams on how we kind of do that and how we keep them focused on the things we really care about. And obviously same to the engineering teams, when we're kind of talking in more detail with them, it's like, here's the 20 things we really care about. So my engineers would talk to them with a much more detailed of, here's all the actual vulnerabilities and here's why we need you to care about these ones most, and these other ones still need fixing, but they can be done in the kind of longer timelines. So, and then again, that helps them because we're not going here have 10,000 vulns, we're going here have 100 or 50 or 10 or whatever it is that are the most important ones this cycle or whatever, or this sprint. So I think you can kind of tailor it up and down in terms of, to the engineers, it's how we're working with you to understand what you need to be working on and how we'll manage that. And to the people further up or not in security, it's business risk and working within risk appetite and risk tolerance. And it's the same conversation. It's just the level of detail and how you describe it. But yes, and it's I think it's working really well. And I think it demonstrates our kind of demonstrates kind of security's engagement with the business, how we care about the fact the business is trying to deliver things. So in that example, rather than being there's AppSec here and engineering here and people there, and it's no, we really care about. I've renamed we've put together, for example, my cloud security and my application security people into one team and called it product security, because it's effectively how do we build and run secure product, which is what our business is. So they're engaged with the product and engineering teams on ensuring everything we build and run is appropriately secure. So it's that business engagement and business alignment I think is really important, and that helps very much with them when we're talking about it to people who aren't engineers and security folk, because we're demonstrating how aligned we are to the business's mission.
Cool. Hey man, that's a great place to end it because we are over on time. It has been, and it's evening, so it's time to go play with your toddler some more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for joining, man. This has been great. One, because we have talking forever, and two, it's a lot of wisdom in there, and I wish you good luck, and continued luck, and it's are you coming down to any of the security cons in the US this year?
Not this year. I've got far too much on. I would like to come out to like one RSA and Black Hat again, maybe next year, just because they're just such big events, right? But I won't be there this year, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, I might be heading over to your side of the pond in a bit later on this year, so we'll see. Maybe run into you. But hey, thanks for your time. I'll be in touch, and this has been fun. It's been quite educational. So, folks, I hope you got something out of it. I felt like this was a grab bag, a little bit for everybody. All right, Kevin, thanks for joining, folks. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Glad to have you aboard. Go check us out on LinkedIn and the pod. I'm actually super curious as we dive into 25 where you listen and how you listen. So any feedback on that would be useful. Spotify, Apple, iTunes, direct RSS feed, transcribed via Tin Can. I don't know, whatever. Let me know. I am curious. I'd love to get you guys engaged a little bit more with our guests because they spend a lot of time bringing some and distilling some of that knowledge out to you. So catch you guys another time, another place on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye.